Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Come with me as we step into the deep, dark forest of fear, and let's hope that we see sunrise in the morning. Tonight's show is featuring some of the scariest and creepiest swamp monster or creature stories that I could find. Some olden goldies, and I think you guys should really enjoy these. Of course, as ever, please do let us know down below in the comments. As ever, please do like and share. Without further ado, let's get into tonight's first story, entitled Uncle Wallace's Shack. Let's get straight into that. My Uncle Wallace lives on a parcel of property bordering a dense wetlands in Georgia. To say that he's isolated is an understatement. The road he lives on isn't even paved, and his nearest neighbour is a couple of miles away. I remember him once saying his real neighbours were the things living in the swamp. We never visited him when I was young. He was too much of a shut-in. My father said his house, if you could call it a house, generally reeked of lime and alcohol, and there was too much shit cluttering up the place for anyone but Wallace to sleep. Apparently, he was something of a hoarder. I met him a couple of times when he came out for family funerals. He drove an old pale blue Chevy that looked like a haggard resemblance of himself. Wallace himself looked like a scarecrow in a suit. Combs and brushes probably ran screaming at the sight of him. The first time I met him, he shook my hand and grumbled a polite greeting. For the rest of the day, our dog would scurry away when I tried to pet it with that hand. I never asked my father why Uncle Wallace was the way he was. I was kind of afraid I'd get an answer. I just accepted that something had put him there, and he was fine with it, and just living day by day until the day he would wound up stiffer than his sheets. I wondered if anyone would notice when he died, how long it would go and take if they did. After college, I made plans to travel south, stop in Florida and visit some friends, briefly, while I had the freedom to do so. My father called me up the day before I left and told me he had mailed Uncle Wallace this week prior, informing him that I was going to stop by and visit on my way down. "Why would you do that?" I asked. "The only way to contact your uncle is by mail," my dad said. I knew that if I asked you to check on him and make sure he was okay, you would. So I had to let him know you were coming, far enough ahead of time for him to get the word so he wouldn't panic when you arrived or shoot you for trespassing. "Thanks, Dad," I grumbled. "I guess I'll have to just adjust my route. What should I do if he's dead?" "Call the police and let them know. But make sure you're certain. Don't just assume he's dead by the smell." "Yeah, great." 13 hours later, I was bumping and jolting down the dirt road to my uncle's house. The way was so narrow that if another car had shown up going the opposite direction, one of us would have had to either back up to a place to pull over, or just pull over down the slope and into the bog. Thankfully, there was nobody else that day. When I got to the house, it was still light, but the sun had started to set behind the trees. The house looked worse than I had envisioned from all my father's tales. It was a shack, hardly bigger than 2 college dorm rooms. The windows were boarded up with plastic trash bags underneath. There was a stoop in the front with a warped tin roof held precariously aloft by a thick board on one side and an old ladder on the other. The front entrance had a white screen door with peeling paint. The mailbox was rusted, with a big white 36 painted on the side. Its post was propped against a tree stump. Uncle Wallace's truck was parked against the tree. There was a pile of torn and mouldy cardboard boxes heaped in the bed, and a broken wicker chair propped up against the back of the cab. There was a chain wrapped and tied around the trunk of the tree that disappeared underneath the truck. I parked behind the truck and surveyed the house for a few minutes, thinking about my dad's joke over the phone. What if he's dead? I really didn't want to deal with him being dead. The minutes ticked by as I sat there, waiting, hoping he'd just come out after hearing me pull up, so I wouldn't have to go investigate and find a corpse. Finally, I got out, went up to the front door and knocked. When no answer came, I called out, "Uncle Wallace?" Still, no response. Oh God, please don't be dead. That was just a bad joke. It occurred to me that maybe he was dead. The letter from my father might still be in his mailbox. So, I went and took a peek inside. Nothing. Where was this guy? I put my hands to my mouth and shouted, "Uncle Wallace!" "What?" came the immediate reply from the other side of the house. I waited a moment expecting him to come around, but when he didn't, I walked behind the house to find him. The back of the house skirted dangerously close to the edge of the swamp. Uncle Wallace was sitting in a tan recliner, facing the marsh, an old shotgun draped across his lap. He was older now, more grizzled and liver-spotted. He had on a filthy flannel shirt, baggy jeans, and a wide-brimmed hat with a mosquito netting that obscured his face. An old, black grill was slowly sinking into the ground next to him, and as I stood there, I swear it sank another inch. He turned and looked at me as I rounded a corner, took me in for a second, then muttered, "Oh, Jake's boy, Friday, isn't it?" He grunted, adjusting himself in the chair, and then scratched an itch. "Yes, sir," I said, remembering what my father had said long ago about Uncle Wallace being particular about manners and respecting your elders. "How are you, sir? It's nice to see you again." Busy," he muttered. "But if you're going to be a pest, you might as well pull up a chair and chew the fat for a while." I found an old fold-out lawn chair and propped it up against the back of the shack, covered with spider webs, and cleaned it off thoroughly before settling my haunches on it. We sat there together for a few quiet minutes, both of us just staring out at the marsh as the sun dipped lower on the horizon. The place was ripe with life. I could hear frogs and birds out among the water and trees. The insect life was rampant too, and I had to swat regularly at mosquitoes that violated my personal bubble. Finally, as the sky turned dark, I couldn't take the silence anymore. "It gets a good reception," I said, trying to break the ice. "But can you get ESPN on it?" "Hush up," Uncle Wallace spat back. He started stroking the barrel of his gun, which I realised was laid across his lap pointing at me. Nervous, I shifted back a couple of feet to get out from the front of it. "I really just came by to see if you were okay," I said. "You mean to make sure I weren't did?" "Did?" "Did, pushing Daisy." "Worm food, did." "Oh, yes, did. Well, I see you're not did, so..." "I told you, hish," he grumbled, shaking the shotgun at me for a moment. I was feeling a mite anxious with him waving it around. There was no telling whether he was even sober or not. He smelled like rotten vegetables mixed in burnt gravy. If there was alcohol in him, it probably couldn't find a clean pore to seep out of. I sat there, silent, watching him, watching the bog. Sometimes I'd lean close just for a moment. Longer, and I might pass out, to try to discern what it was that he was looking at. The sun was set by then, but the trees and the water seemed almost to glow from the moonlight. I was about to speak again, saying my goodbyes, when I heard the sloshing sound of water lapping against tree trunks. Then again, something moving in the weeds and the muck. Uncle Wallace's arm snapped over and gripped my wrist faster than I expected for an old man. He leaned around the edge of his chair to look at me, then put his finger to his lips. My stomach went into knots. The splashing continued. I tried to figure out which direction it was coming from, but it reverberated off the trees, making it difficult to determine. After a moment, the echo was off sync, and I realised I wasn't listening to one thing moving, but two, from different directions. Two somethings sloshing through the swamp right in front of us. Was it a crocodile? I asked, not bothering to lower my voice. Uncle Wallace turned angrily at me and hissed through clenched teeth, but it was too late. A low groan suddenly emerged from the direction of the bog. It was like the sound of a large tree making it as it topples over. The groan was repeated in the other direction, sending shivers down my spine. As I listened, the groan seemed to turn into a slow laugh, like a "You confounded idiot!" My uncle spat at me. He reached down the other side of his chair and pulled out a massive flashlight strapped to a car battery. He tossed it violently in my lap, then thought better of it, clasped his hand over the top of it. "Don't you dare turn this on, lest I say so." He pointed his gnarled finger right in my face and accentuated this point with a shake of the hand holding the shotgun. He turned back around, hefting the shotgun up and angling it toward the groan. I heard him mutter under his breath, "Some bitch retarded kin, showing up tonight of all nights." My hands were shaking. I wanted to run to my car and just go, but something inside of me said to stay and help my uncle. He was already angry at me. How would it look for me to just flee like a sissy when I didn't even know what it was that was going on? The groaning and the laughter got closer, and I heard the first heavy footfall of something stepping up out of the murky water. "Light!" my uncle shouted suddenly, and I panicked, realising I didn't even know where the button was to push. I started pushing all over this massive flashlight, anything that felt like a button. It was taking too damn long. "Lights, dagnammit!" Uncle Wallace shouted. Something gave way under my thumb and I pushed it. The flashlight lit up in my face, blinding me for a second, and I hurried, swivelling round in my lap, and shot it out into the swamp. "Holy shit!" was all I could say. Right in front of us, not more than an arm's reach away, was something I can only describe as a monster. It was hunched over like an ape, with flesh looking like it had peeled a man and draped it over itself like a child drapes a sheet over itself on Halloween. The flesh around its eyes was sagging and its mouth hung open, a long tongue lolling around inside over 2 rows of giant teeth. Its body was covered with vegetation and mud and glistened like it was wet. I didn't have time to look much lower. In a moment, the flashlight came on and I turned it around to illuminate this horror. The thing groaned, saw us in a second. It wasn't being blinded by the light and broke out into a horrifying, twisted grin. It leaned its head back, its eyes widening, and threw both arms up, reaching out towards my uncle. It gave one burst of grunting laughter, lurched maybe a step forward, and then there was a boom, and my uncle's shotgun lit up like a firework. The ape thing tumbled backwards, arms flailing. The two of us were splattered with ooze and filth. I shouted in horror, nearly dropping the flashlight as muck and possibly blood splattered my vision. I went backwards myself, tipping over a fold-out chair and falling hard on my back. Uncle Wallace started yelling at me to get back up while I heard him opening the shotgun to pop out the shells and reload. My ears were ringing though, and my head was spinning, and the flashlight was heavy on my chest. I kicked my legs for a second, trying to right myself. Another groan from deeper in the swamp told me there were more of those things present, probably approaching. I stupidly threw the flashlight off and it went out with a loud crack. Uncle Wallace was up out of his chair by then, rooting through the cushion and swearing loudly. "What the fuck was that?" I shouted. "Get inside and find more shells!" he yelled back. I tumbled over myself, shoving my way through the back door and into the dark clutter that was my uncle's house. How the fuck was I supposed to find anything in there? I fell over a table, slamming my shoulder into something hard. Frustrated, I fumbled around with my hands until I found a chain hanging from the ceiling and pulled it, turning on the lights. Fuck! What a mess! Even with the lights on, the shack was so trashed and messy that I had no idea where to begin. Outside, I heard my uncle start shouting, "Turn the lights out! Idiot, turn them out!" "I can't see in here," I responded. I started throwing things around, looking for anything that looked like shotgun shells. How had I gotten into this mess? My uncle kicked through the door, brandishing the shotgun with both hands and a look of rage on his face. He marched across the room, shoved his hand in a pile of books and came back with a box of ammunition. He marched back across the room, grabbed the chain and turned the lights back off. Taking a moment to set the gun down, he startled me, grabbing me by my lapel in the dark and jerking me so close to his face that I was tasting the bugs on his mosquito net. "You just showed him where the dang blasted house is," he hissed. Oh God, he had been drinking. "What the fuck are they?" I stammered. I was too terrified to try not to sound ready to piss myself. Uncle Wallace threw me back, causing me to fall against a shelf of stuff that came crashing down over me like a landslide. I could hear him load the shotgun as efficiently and naturally in the dark as if he was born with it in his hand. He stomped to the door, kicked it open again, turned, silhouetted against the glowing backdrop of the swamp, and the last thing this man, who according to my father had never cussed a day in his life, said to me was, "Fuck if I know." The door swung shut behind him, but I could hear a cacophony of groans and horrible laughter echoing through the bog before it did. This man didn't need me. I was a nuisance to him. I dug my way out of the rubble and crawled in the opposite direction till I found the front door. I didn't even bother to dust myself off. I ran straight for my car. All around, from both sides of the road, I could hear that haunting sound of groaning and deep-throated chuckles. Another shotgun blast came from the other side of the house, lighting things up for a second. I climbed in my car, locked the doors, and, unlike in the movies, I got my keys in the ignition in one fluid motion. It started up. I backed out, barely remembering to look over my shoulder to make sure I didn't even doom myself by crashing into anything. I then spun my tyres, stepping on the gas in a hurry. I started to breathe easier once the car was in motion. The bumps and jolts of the road almost seemed to relax me. Then, to my horror, one of those things stepped out in front of my headlights, and I struck it going probably 30 or 40 miles per hour. It exploded on contact with my car, like a giant balloon full of shit. My windshield went brown and I almost screamed, turning on my wipers before I crashed. I didn't slow down at all. If anything, that made me speed up. When I reached the filling station, about 25 minutes later, I popped the door open and retched onto the asphalt. The service attendant came out, it was full service, and walked around my car, scratching his head under his cap. "What the fuck happened to you?" he asked. I had no answer for him. "Do you have a phone I can use?" I said, my throat hoarse. I stood inside the gas station, waiting for my dad to pick up the phone, watching the attendant futilely swabbing at the rancid filth that had streamed up over my hood and windshield and coated nearly the entirety of the top of my car. When he picked up, before he had a chance to say anything, I shouted, "What the fuck, Dad?" "Huh? Who's this?" "Who'd you think? I just left Uncle Wallace's dad." "Oh, so he's alive? That's good. How is he?" "I don't know that he's still alive right now. He was shooting fucking swamp monsters when I left." I went on to explain exactly what I'd seen. My father remained quiet the entire time, just listening. When I was done, he acted as if I had just told him Uncle Wallace had been sitting around in his underwear, watching Judge Judy. "I don't know what to tell you," he said. "Your Uncle Wallace is a bit odd." "What were those things?" I yelled. How the hell would I know? Why was he acting so casual about everything? Look, just go get a motel room and sleep it off and enjoy the rest of your vacation. Needless to say, the rest of the trip sucked. How exactly does one go from sitting in a swamp with a hermit blowing up an ape creature with a shotgun to relaxing on a beach in Florida? It's just not possible. Let me tell you. I found what I think was a flap of skin stuck to my rear antenna. My uncle survived the night, to those who were wondering. Apparently, the whole event was more of a bother to him than a nightmare. He wrote my father an angry letter that got there weeks later, telling him not to send his idiot brood by anymore. He had nothing to worry about. Between the shit I saw that night and other things I've got to deal with, I don't plan to ever go back there. Go there and cook fish. Let's get straight into that. The old man sat in an old metal patio chair, his stone-cold blue eyes staring out over the fields. Even as I approached him, his gaze never changed. The only way to even know he was alive was by his slow, rhythmic rocking. When I put my foot on the first wooden porch step, he slowly, almost mockingly turned his head. I met his gaze and froze in place. Hello, are you Mr... Hello, are you Mr. Abernathy? The old man considered me for a moment. From this distance I could see his shoulders and arms still looked strong, despite his obvious age. Under his blue coat he wore a pair of overalls, the kind you might see a farmer or rough tradesman wear. Yeah, came his reply. Hi, I'm Clinton Pardy. I write for the Democrats. I was hoping I could talk to you for a moment. I'd come for a story. I'd been writing for the Natchez Democrat for 3 years now, mostly doing fluff pieces on the local schools or civic organisations. A garden club party, a graduation, occasionally a high school playoff game. Not exactly hard-hitting journalism. Then, one night at Bobby's J Tavern, after a few beers and games of pool with a retired truck driver from across the river, I'd gotten a tip. The truck driver told me he'd heard from a friend who'd heard from a friend about this old man, Abernathy, who had an experience back in the 50s or 60s, a long time ago. But the bits and the pieces of the story I got were tantalising. I had to know more. It took some doing, but eventually the trail led me to some old trailer nestled amid miles of farmland outside Vidalia on the Louisiana side of the river. When I pulled up to the old dirt road and into the driveway, it was obvious the home had seen better days. A few dogs prowled around the sparse yard. A dusty Chevrolet pickup truck sat rusting nearby. A rickety-looking porch was the only adornment to the trailer, and it was on this porch that the old man sat, staring out into the distance in silent contemplation. The old man looked like he was thinking for a long time. After I asked if I could to him for a minute, then, at length, he nodded and said, "Come on." I climbed the creaking stairs and extended my hand towards him. He shook it weakly with a cold, dry grip. I pulled up an unoccupied chair nearby and sat down across from him as he looked into my eyes. "Mr. Abernathy, I'm sorry to disturb you this afternoon, and I appreciate your time. I was told you might have a story to tell." He cocked his head and puzzled at me. "Nah, ain't nothing been going on around here." I smiled. "Well, sir, this is something that happened a long time ago, down in South Louisiana." The old man's expression changed subtly. He didn't move. His gaze remained fixed on mine, but maybe his breath got caught in his throat just for a second. "Nah, ain't no story." I paused a moment. Abernathy looked away, out across the field. He slowly reached for a glass on the table next to him and took a sip. "Okay, well, I was told that maybe something happened when you were younger and that nobody ever really believed you. But I wanted to tell your story, maybe help people see your side." He snapped his head around with surprising speed. "I don't give a damn what people believe, boy." His face had gotten red in an instant. His lips trembled slightly and his breath was suddenly ragged. "I'm sorry, Mr. Abernathy. I didn't mean to upset you. I just know you've never been given the benefit of doubt. They put me on trial for that. People been looking at me like a goddamn monster for 60 years round here. I should have left. I should have moved. I would have if I could. Well, Mr. Abernathy, can I hear the story? Can I tell people the truth?" "Okay. It happened, I think, in 59. I was 21 at the time. My brother, he was, I guess 19. Now, I'm going to tell you for the God's honest truth about it. We ran drugs, marijuana mostly. I don't know who the hell for. I just knew we were getting paid well for our time. We'd go down to Slidell and pick it up and carry it back up here and pass it off to the coloured man from Jackson. Where it went from there, I don't know. But we were a couple of white trash farm kids from Delta, and it was an easy buck. Well, one time, we were headed down to Slidell, and we called our connection on the way. He told us the drop-off would be a day late, and we didn't have no money. But I had my hunting stuff in the truck, had a tent and some fishing gear, so we decided to camp while we waited. We asked around town about a place to camp and fish, and somebody told us to get out of this little place called White Kitchen. Don't think there was even a post office there. When we got there, we ran into this little store for some beers. My brother got talking to these old timers in the back playing checkers, asking them about fishing spots. I heard one of the old guys say, "Send them down to Bishop's Bayou." Well, they all got real still at that, and nobody said nothing. So my brother says, "What's Bishop's Bayou?" And they said, "Nah, you don't want to go there." They kind of got skittish, so I say, "So what's wrong with the place?" And one of them says, "There's things down there, bad things." We thought they were just trying to scare a couple of kids, and my brother told them so. Well, one of the old guys, a real nasty looking bastard, probably older than myself now, gets a real stern look to him and says, "Well, if you don't believe it, go there and cook fish." Abernathy got quiet for a long moment and stared off into the distance. When he spoke again, it was with just the slightest hint of a tremble in his voice. He continued. We should have listened to him, but we laughed it off, got our beer and some worms and asked directions to Bishop's Bayou. The gas station man just kind of looked at us like we were crazy and told us the way, so we went down. Fished all the rest of the day, and by night we had us 4 or 5 big uns. We were hungry, so we built a fire and threw the fish on. Didn't think nothing of it. We did it all the time. We laughed about what the old men told us. We were drinking beer and having a good old time till it got real dark. The old man shifted in his rocker and at this point cleared his throat. He reached over for the glass on the table and took a long drink. After several quiet seconds, he went on. I don't know what time it was. It was after dark. We just took the fish out the pan, getting ready to eat, and we started hearing something out in the woods. I don't know. Hoots and hollers. Didn't sound like anything we'd heard. Then we started remembering what the old man had told us about the things in the swamp, and I started thinking we ought to leave. But my brother, he said it was nothing, maybe wildcats out screaming in the woods. The old man took a long pause again. His voice was audibly trembling now. So we tried to eat, but before we could even get down and sat down good, a rock came flying in, hit me in the arm. I jumped back, reached for my knife. Then come another rock from the other direction, and then another one. Damn near knocked my brother out, hit him in the back of the head. Well, he was so damn mad, he went to the truck and got his rifle and fired a shot into the air, and then hollered, "You get out of here, you son of bitches, before I shoot your ass!" It got real quiet for a few minutes after that. We watched the trees, trying to see who was out there. I was scared to death. The old man shook his head. I told him we needed to go, but my brother was mad. He said he was going to shoot the bastard that hit him with the rock. I tried to stop him, but he wouldn't. He was always the hothead. It was dark by then, but the dumb son of a bitch just stepped into the woods like he wasn't afraid of nothing. The old man reached for his glass. I could see his hand was shaking so badly he could barely get a sip. His voice cracked as he began again. I stood there, listening. I could hear him walking through the brush. I called out to him to come back, said let's just go to town and find a motel. Then I heard 2 gunshots and a kind of rumbling growl, like a bear or something. Next thing I know, my brother is running back toward me. He'd dropped his rifle and was heading for the truck, so I done the same. I ran over there, dove into the passenger side and shut the door behind me. I looked back out and I see my brother, but he wasn't running. He was laying on his stomach, clawing at the ground at something. God, I don't know what it was, but just a big black shadow, but something had him by the leg, dragging him back into the woods. Tears ran freely down the old man's face at this point. Last thing I ever heard was him screaming. It was so loud, even in the truck, with the windows up. I heard it like he was right next to me. I couldn't move. I was just froze. I couldn't look away. I couldn't help him. I couldn't do nothing. I saw him disappear into the brush, getting dragged away by that thing. Then after what seemed like forever, the screaming just stopped. The old man had stopped rocking in his chair by this point. The silent tears running down his face eventually dried up, and he just sat, staring, glassy-eyed, like he was trying to remember something. After a long time, I spoke. "Is that the end of the story?" Abernathy wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "I passed out or something. I woke up next day, fire was out. I looked around, I couldn't find anything but my brother's rifle. It was damn broke in half, like somebody had smashed it up against a tree. I couldn't find anything else. Just some drag marks in the dirt that led off into the woods. Couldn't follow them for long." Abernathy then turned and looked at me, a hard glare in his eyes. "I got charged with murder of my brother when he didn't turn up. I told that jury that he just disappeared into the night and I didn't know what happened to him. But I lied. They didn't have any evidence to prove anything either way, so they ended up letting me go. Well, hell, I guess I did kill him. I didn't even try to help. I just watched him get drug off." Another long minute passed. After some years, I got tired of lying and told the truth to a few people. But ain't nobody believed me. My own mama died thinking I killed him. People round here have hated me for 50 years. The old man stood up suddenly and shuffled towards the door of his trailer. I sat motionless, processing everything I'd just heard. Abernathy reached for the door handle and swung it open, with still shaking hands, but paused one last time and turned his head sharply toward me before stepping inside. And I tell you, just like I told everyone else, if you don't believe me, go there and cook fish. Wow, hope you guys enjoyed those two extremely creepy swamp stories there. Of course, do let me know down below in the comments as ever. Please do like and share. If you haven't joined the DMT family, please smash that subscribe button and the notification bell to stay up to date with all DMT content. And as ever, guys, remember, if you're taking a trip to the deep, dark, humid swamp, remember, keep your eyes on what's around you and in the trees. And above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.